Hi guys, so in the last video we talked about all of chapter 19, which was communities and ecosystems, and today we're going to talk about chapter 18, which is all about population sizes and lots of cool stuff actually. So going back to populations now, before I start this video, I just want to say I'm feeling so bad. Like honestly, I'm feeling terrible. So I'm going to get through the chapter 18 lecture. It'll be shorter, I think, than the chapter 19 lecture. And yeah, I'm going to do the chapter 18. That way I'm only leaving you with one chapter. Guys, please, I hate doing this, but honestly, even if we were having an in-person class, I would have canceled that class. So I looked through your final, and on your final, you only have 5 questions out of 80. Okay, 5 questions out of 80 questions on chapter 20. So it's an important chapter for your life. And I encourage you to look through the PowerPoint and everything, but I'm not doing the last 2 lectures on chapter 20. I just feel awful. Honestly, I feel terrible. So I'm going to do chapter 18. I'm going to get through it right now. And then y'all please look through chapter 20 yourself. Like I said, only 5 out of 80 questions are on that on your final. I'm so sorry to leave y'all like that. But yeah, I just hope you understand. I'm really feeling terrible. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to start talking about chapter 18. So all of this is available on Blackboard for you and all of that good stuff. Other announcements: you have all finished exam 3 by this point. You only have 2 homework assignments this week on chapter 18 and chapter 20. Chapter 20 homework assignment will probably help you prepare for the exam anyway. Then you have quizzes 11 and 12. So only 2 quizzes due on Saturday. Also on Friday, you have all of your Connect homework assignments due if you wanted to do those for bonus points. So do those. They're due Friday at 5 p.m. And then on Monday, you've got your final exam that's due at 5 p.m. So just make sure you're getting all that done. Make sure you're finishing strong. And guys, I'll be available to you over email. I'm so sorry to do that to you. Okay, so population size, this is going to be the additions. Population growth is a measure of additions minus subtractions. Now, additions, as we'll see in just a second, they're not just births. They could be, migration into a population, and subtractions are not just deaths. They're organisms leaving a population as well. Population growth rate is the change in population size per unit time. So over a number of days or years, for instance. This largely is going to depend on birth rate, the number of new individuals produced per individual per unit time. But like I said, it's not just birth rate, it's also migration into the population. And these are affected by the number of reproductive episodes per lifetime. So for instance, a human is going to reproduce far less often than a snake or a bird. The number of offspring per reproductive episodes. Again, humans are going to produce typically 1 offspring, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, sometimes 8, whatever. But typically it's going to be less than something like a turtle or a bird or a snake. I noticed that I just only named reptiles. So anyway, okay, mice, for instance. Age at first reproduction, if we could start reproducing within a few years of us being born, we would certainly have more births per person than we do right now. And that's because we have to reach puberty, that reproductive age, before we are able to start reproducing. And many people don't even wait decades longer than that to start reproducing. Then migration into the population is going to be affected by suitable habitats and the availability of moving to a new location. Oh, and what I wanted to show you here, human birth rate is almost 20 per 1,000 people per year. So if you have a group of 1,000 people, every year, about 20 of them would reproduce, okay? About 20 of them would give birth to a new offspring, okay? So about 20 per 1,000 people per year. Now, your population age structure is a way to determine if you have a growing, stable, or declining population. So if we're looking at the white oak here, for instance, what I want you to notice is that you have a ton of really young, about 60% of all white oaks in this particular population are 50 years old, okay? Versus the trees that are 300 years old, that's only about 2%, okay? So this means that you have a ton of younger individuals that are going to replace all of these older individuals. So that's going to be a growing population, high potential for future growth because you have all of these younger individuals. Versus the cottonwood, this is a shrinking population. The dying trees are not replaced with young trees. And you can see that because there are 0% of the trees are at 10 years old, and almost 50%, 45-ish%, almost all of the trees are going to be at 40 to 50 years old. So the replacement of these trees when they die, they're not going to be replaced, okay? That's a declining population. All right, so it's not only dependent on birth rate, also on death rate, which is the number of deaths per unit time, but also migration out of a population. And again, so deaths, in subtractions, deaths could be from very many things, right? Think of things that people die from or organisms die from all the time: accidents, predation, genetic or infectious diseases, nutrient availability. And then migration out of a population, again, are going to be affected by the ability for them to disperse. So our birth rate was about 20 per 1,000 people per year. So a group of 1,000 people, 20 of them would, we would add 20 humans to that population every year of 1,000 people, okay? But it's going to vary greatly by species. So the death rate, on the other hand, per 1,000 people per year, 8 of those people will die. So as you can see, for our human birth rate versus our human death rate, we have many more additions than we have subtractions. So we have this rapidly increasing population. The probability of surviving to a certain age can be determined using a life table. So if we look at this life table for your yellow-eyed penguins, at 0 years old, you have 1,000 survivors, okay? Then by the time you reach 1 year old, you only have 324 penguins. So you have this huge drop off, this 2/3 drop off in just a year. So 2/3 of that population will not survive to its first birthday. Then by 8 years old, you have 138 penguins that have survived. And by 16 years old, you only have 57 of the original 1,000 penguins that survived that 16 years or longer. Now you can map this into a table with survivorship curves. And as you can see, so just you're mapping it every year. How many survivors, how many survivors? Now the biggest drop off, the biggest decline is going from 0 to 1 years old. And you only have a 30% survival rate at that year-old mark. Then at the 5 years old, you had a 20% survival rate. At 12-ish years old, you had a 10% survival rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it also shows you whereabouts they're able to begin reproducing, okay? So even though you only have a 10% survival rate here, that doesn't matter because almost 25% of the population is actually able to reach reproductive age, which is really good for that species. All right, so now based on survivorship curves, we can tell a lot about the organisms. Dogs, please. It's a lot. Guys, it's a lot all the time. I got my first dog when I was 20 years old. Is that my husband? I got my first dog when I was 20 years old. Got my second dog when I was also 20 years old. And then I got my third dog when I was 21 years old. I was literally your ages. Yeah, I'm not your ages anymore. And I just want to say that was a mistake. I love them so much. Like, please do not get me wrong. I love them so much. They're getting old now, but oh my God, you're going to get one and you're going to be like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. I need one more to be a friend. No, doesn't need a friend. Doesn't need a friend. And you know what? You're never alone. You're like, I'm so lonely, I need a pet. Guys, you have millions of mites on all your hair follicles and your eyelashes and all over your body. You are very busy already. You don't need dogs. I promise. Visit people with dogs. That's my suggestion to you. Visit people with dogs. Did you hear, Gabe? All right, so survivorship curves, you can tell a lot about the organism. So for type 1 survivorship curves, you've got humans, other large vertebrates like elephants. In these type 1 survivorship curves, what you can tell is that there's this low death rate early in life. Most of the organisms that are born are going to survive well into adulthood. And then after adulthood, later in life, you've got this quick drop off, okay? Now for type 1, you're going to have a ton of parental input. You're going to have very low numbers of offspring born at once. That's because of this parental input. You're going to oftentimes not even just parental input right after birth, but a lot of times the offspring are going to stick with the parents for a long, long time after birth. Then you get type 3. Well, let's just jump right now to type 3. And your type 3 survivorship curves, what I want you to notice is there's this really steep death rate early in life. High early death rate early in life. And because of this, type 3 organisms, like fish, most invertebrates, plants, they are going to do everything they can to produce as many offspring as they possibly can, because most of them will not survive. So if you think about plants giving off a bunch of seeds, like a shit ton of seeds, okay, it doesn't matter how many seeds that they're putting out because they know that most of them won't survive, but some of them will. Similarly with flies. Is a fly caring for its offspring? No, they're not caring for their offspring. Many fish, are they caring for their offspring? No, they're not caring for their offspring. They're born and then they just like instinctually know what they're supposed to be doing. So the high death rate, low parental input, high number of offspring per reproductive episode. Invest little energy in raising their young. Then you've got the type 2 survivorship curves. This is many birds and many mammals. You've got an equal probability of dying at any age. Okay, so it's more or less consistent at any age. And that could mean that some offspring might be sick at birth. Some might not pick up on how to fly very quickly. Some might be predated on for the rest of their lives. Okay, so an equal probability of dying at any age, but type 2 survivorship curves, they have a lower number of offspring and they have this parental input. So which of the animals below would be most likely to live to its maximum lifespan and invest a lot of energy into raising its young, its offspring? So sparrow, An elephant or a mosquito? Elephant. And what kind of survivorship curve does an elephant have? Type 1. An elephant with a type 1 survivorship curve. Sparrow would be the next highest, okay, with a type 2 survivorship curve. Mosquito with the type 3. So life history includes all of the events of an organism's life from conception to death. And another way of looking at life history is that it's an organism's strategy for reproduction and survival. And we're going to talk about some of these strategies, some of these life history strategies. So first, you have opportunistic species, and then we're going to talk about equilibrium species. Opportunistic and equilibrium species. Your opportunistic species, these are going to be your type 3 survivorship curve, okay? They're going to be short-lived. Most of them are going to die at an early age. They're going to reproduce at an early age as well. Offspring receive little care. Growth rate might be high under optimal conditions, but again, most of the offspring don't survive. Each offspring has a low probability of survival. So it's that type 3 survivorship curve right here. And like we said, lots of insects, lots of plants are that type 3 survivorship curve. It's an opportunistic species. Versus your equilibrium species, long-lived, they mature late, they receive extended parental care, high probability of survival on among their offspring, and that's because you're having fewer offspring and you're caring for them more. You're investing a ton of time and energy into raising young for these equilibrium species, okay? But not just mammals, okay? Not just some of these large vertebrates, but also some plants are these equilibrium species as well. So something like a coconut tree. These coconuts take forever to grow and develop. And I mean, that's putting in extended parental care, okay? So these are going to be type 1 and type 2 survivorship curves are in your equilibrium species. Which of the following statements about equilibrium species is true? They are short-lived, they reproduce at an early age, they have only a few offspring, they have a large number of offspring, they give very little care to their offspring. Okay, all of these except for C is talking about opportunistic species, okay? So only C is talking about equilibrium species. They only have a few offspring. They only have a few offspring. Imagine, literally, imagine humans if every time a human reproduced, she gave birth to 8 young, or 10 young, or 26 young. Like, would that be a thing that could happen? Could that mother give energy to all of those young? No, and y'all know I'm pregnant. And honestly, like, God, only got one, and pregnancy kind of sucks. All right, so your patterns of population growth. Questions of interest: how fast does a population grow, and how we 2 models to represent the ways that populations can grow: exponential growth and logistic growth. Exponential and logistic growth. With exponential growth, and I'm just going to show, with exponential growth, the number added is going to increase too. Okay, so after 5 days, you've got 60 individuals per day. After 15 days, you have 437 individuals per day. And after 20 days, just 5 days later, you've got over almost 1,200 individuals a day. So growth rate increases in proportion to the population size. As the days go on and you get more and more, that population is just going, all right. Exponential growth curves are J-shaped. With logistic growth, resources become limited, okay? As you have this growth curve approaching what's called the carrying capacity, growth is going to slow down because you cannot move past. So because resource, for example, okay, so a population size hits a maximum that the habitat can even possibly accommodate, which is the carrying capacity. Growth rate declines as the carrying capacity is approached, and with logistic growth, this curve is going to be more or less S-shaped, okay? S-shaped is for logistic growth. You can remember this, okay? Exponent. Many factors limit population size. You can have density dependent or density independent factors that are limiting your population size. So the way I want you to remember this is density dependent factors about biotic. The reason that your size would be limited in a density dependent way is, for instance, if you had only and 5 flamingos, but you have 40 flamingos. Okay, well, that's a density dependent factor. You're not going to be able to feed everybody enough because you have too many organisms. Versus a density independent factor, does this gigantic fire care how many organisms there are? No. Is the size of this fire going to depend on how many deer are in this environment? Those are abiotic independent. Let's talk about the biotic factors first. So density dependent factors intensify as the population density increases. So these deer might be competing among each other for space, nutrients, mates. And if you look at it, then your flamingo example. So this is density dependent factors. This is where individuals are competing or that is spreading because you have this denser population, okay? Because, so for instance, let's see, in density dependent factors, okay, where's COVID, like Wyoming? I mean, like, yeah, but is that a hot spot? No, no, there aren't very many people and a lot of people. So, dependent factor. You're not having a hot spot in a place like Nebraska, but you are in places like Texas or Florida or New York, obviously. Okay. Density independent factors, completely unrelated to population density. This is going to be seasonal freezing, fire, floods, storms, other environmental changes. So here you have an exponential growth and then a sudden decline. Something happened here. This sudden decline, okay? This fire does not care how many deer there are. Number of aphids has no effect on floods or storms, for instance. All right, guys, so the size of the bacterial population on my hands is limited by frequent exposure to soap. Is soap exposure a density dependent or a density independent factor on population size? Does the use of antibacterial soap, does its effectiveness depend on how many bacteria No, 10% of them. So this is a density independent factor on population size. Gabe, be quiet. Density independent factor. A large population of fish in a pond experience high mortality when a lethal viral infection spreads quickly through the population by contact. The viral infection is an example of density dependent or independent factor. Well, you population, you have a viral. So in order for this to spread quickly through the population, you have fish that have to contact one another. That's okay, density dependent factor. If life history describes the strategy by which a species reproduces, the human species is characterized by, is it an opportunistic strategy or an equilibrial strategy? Equilibrial strategy. Lower reproduction rate, few offspring, extensive parental care, high survival rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, guys. We're in human population growth. I recommend that you go and look at these. This one is just a population clock, and you can literally see how you can see the births and the deaths at the same time, but the deaths just slow down the increases because you have so many more births. So you can actually see the growth of the worldwide population in real time, which is really, really, really cool. Global population has risen so fast over the past century that roughly 14% of all human beings that have ever lived are still alive today. 14%. has ever lived. How many people? Guys, okay, yeah, that's insane. That's insane. So we can predict trends in population growth just like we could with those, like the cottonwood trees and I was an oak tree, something like that, for different countries. Okay, so what I want you to see is little boxes, but if you're looking at the reproductive years versus like this top area, okay, you have a huge number of people that are going this aging population. Huge number of people below reproductive age that are going to replace the people in the reproductive age. So you have this growing population. Similar got a growing population. In the United States, we have a more, if you see, we have all of these people of reproductive age, okay? And we have more or less the same number of people of reproductive age. And look, it's boys and girls, males and females, boys and girls, stop, males and females. We have more or less the same general amount of young people that are coming to reproductive age. And then basically every, how do I explain this? Okay, every demographic is going to replace the next demographic, right? So if you have approximately the same number of people who from birth to just before reproductive years, that's a good thing for this population. We have a stable population. What you don't want is something like this, where you have a huge reproductive age, population of reproductive age, and very are right before reproductive age. That's a decline as much of this like replacement, okay? slow growth rate, reproduction. That is so important, not only for a country's population and places with huge population growth. In the entire world. So what they did, one time, whether it's a boy or girl, it does not matter. You get to reproduce one time, okay? Because, they were gonna reach their carrying capacity. They weren't gonna be able to support their population anymore. So by doing this controlled sort of reproduction, you can slow this growth rate, which is really important. Also, educated women have more opportunity childbearing, and they usually having children. So in the 70s, how many kids did people have? People had like freaking 1 million kids. People had, like, it wasn't uncommon to have 4 or more children back in the 70s. Is it that common now to be from a family with 6 kids? How do they look at you? Okay, so if you are from a family with 6, you came to Ole Miss and you're talking about all your siblings because everybody and their mom has 2 siblings, okay? Or has 1 sibling. It doesn't matter. But educated women waiting longer to reproduce, they have opportunities themselves, which frankly, okay, having opportunities yourself, that is going to mean a better life for your child as well. And it's getting later and later and later and later for all of our different generations, right? So I'm 29 and about to have my first baby, hopefully gonna have my first baby. And my mom had me when she was 18. Okay, so there are huge generational discrepancies between how late women are starting to have children. And that's because of opportunities in education, opportunities in the workplace. These are because of family planning programs and things like that. It's all really important. All right, death rate influences population growth as well. Mortality causes are related to income. If you look at high income countries, are number 1, number 2, a ton of these are actually going to be related to stress. And more notably, they're not the top death causes of death are not going to be necessarily because of diseases related to hygiene, okay? As opposed to low income countries where you have these poorer countries, you have things like causes of death being diarrhea from cholera, from rotavirus, HIV and AIDS, lower respiratory infection, which is also over here. Okay, you get what I'm saying. Ecological footprints. You can determine your ecological footprint at ecologicalfootprint.com. I encourage you to do that. It's pretty awesome. But this not only has to do with your own energy consumption, but it's also like how much food you're eating, how much food you're wasting, the transportation of your food, okay? Because you think about like limes that you get for your margarita and they go bad in the fridge. Okay, well, you're like, well, I only spent 50 cents on that. But the ecological footprint does not care that it's a small thing that you have just wasted or that was just $1 that you spent on limes, okay? Because where did those limes come from? They freaking came from Mexico. Some of them came from California, I don't know, maybe. But how did they get here? Shipping containers or trucks, okay? So huge ecological footprints to even things that we as a developed nation are able to get cheaply, that we have, unparalleled access to, okay? All of this is really important. So an estimate of the land area needed to support a country's overall lifestyle. The average US footprint is 9.4, almost 9.5 hectares per person. 9.5 hectares per person. This represents twice the land area of the United States. So is that sustainable? No, it is not sustainable at all. Ecological impact of affluent nations like the United States is less an issue of size than of consumption. We are wasting food. We are not responsibly sourcing our food. We are not growing our food when we could, et cetera, et cetera. We are huge amounts of wastes. It's gross. Okay. And it's not even that we eat a lot and that we waste a lot. It's also the stuff that we're eating, right? Because like eating a huge amount of animal meat, I mean, that's going to have a bigger ecological footprint than eating a lot of rice, beans, fruits, and vegetables, for instance. All right, so the world's richest countries, 20% of the population of the world uses 86% of the global resources. Okay, so the world's richest countries, they're taking advantage of the global resources. 80% of the population uses 14% of the global resources. It's not great. So you can grow your own food, use a root to fruit mindset, meaning that for a lot of these plants, you're able to use a lot more than just what you're eating. So it says turnips and beets have edible leaves, for instance. You can use a lot of other parts of the plants that you're eating in things like pesto or things like vegetable stocks. You can use them. Or if you don't have to, if you aren't going to find a use for them, don't just throw them away, compost them. That is great for adding nutrients back into the soil, okay? All right, so buy what you need and use what you buy. Use what you buy. Don't let everything just, like, don't go, I was guilty of this last week, but it's because of this little terrorist in my body. I was like, oh, I want some strawberries so bad. William went and got the big container of strawberries. Guys, I'm not kidding. You know, you can see strawberries and when they're like, they're about to go so disgustingly nasty. And so like a day or two before that day was happening, we literally sat down and ate an entire, how much is that? Like, it was so many strawberries. It was a ridiculous number of strawberries. So buy only what you need and eat what you buy. Compost what you don't use. Now, you can't compost animal fat and animal meat with things like fruits and vegetables. Okay, so like research your composting. But you can compost those things, meat and dairy, in different ways, but you just can't compost them together. All right, so it is a valuable soil amendment. Oh my God, it's so good for the soil. It's so good. Like if you were going to make a garden or something, and back in my old house in Columbia, Missouri, we had this, it was this big composter and it was on little legs and it was just this big barrel. And you would throw your stuff in after you were done cooking, for instance, and just like turn it. And literally, guys, it just looks like soil. So if you're making a big garden or something, take that super rich in nutrient soil, this compost, mix it in with some other, garden soil, and then plant your stuff in it. And it's so, so, so good for your plants. Okay, staggering environmental footprint of all food that we just throw in the trash. Americans waste about 1/4 of the food that we buy, and the consequences are enormous. It's really, really bad. All right, we've got a loss of biodiversity, scarce and polluted resources, a changing environment, all tied to overpopulation and overconsumption. habitat loss, overexploitation of environmental resources. We've got invasive species that are just introduced and then take over these ecosystems all the time. Intended and unintended pollution. So, yeah. I like cannot tell you how irritated I get. This is not just, okay, like cigarette butts, guys, or like you're in Turner and the Turner Center, you're in a classroom and you just like leave your shit. First of all, that is rude as fuck. Second of all of that stuff is going to end up in the trash can when it could have ended up in recycling if you weren't super lazy. We were just out and about when we got Chick-fil-A the other day, and we see this student who, they had people in their car and they're all eating Chick-fil-A in the Belk parking lot, and they literally just set all of their trash out on the ground when they were done and they just drove away. Like, this is the thing, you have to have a conscience about the things that you're doing to the environment. It's not just yours. It's not just a place for you to be this lazy steward of the world. Like, if you're doing those things with other people around, like, what the fuck are you doing in your just regular life? Like, what kind of a garbage human are you if you just do that? It's not hard. It's really not hard to find a trash can. It's really not hard to recycle your shit. It is really not hard. So I want to encourage you to not be a garbage human. And if you see your friends doing it, if you see your friend like just like toss something out of the window, or y'all were sitting in the grass and y'all are packing up your bags and you see that he or she left like a piece of paper just out, just grab it. Just grab it, or just say, hey, like, get that. You know, it's not hard at all. And you know what? I feel like this is the day and age, guys. You gotta just say something. You just see something and you just have to say something, because honestly, there are so many garbage humans who just think that like the world is theirs. And it's just so gross, right? Also, oh my God, years ago, when I first started at Ole Miss, my husband is a grad student, and so he's a grad student in the Turner Center, and I was teaching at Ole Miss, and I was also working at that Starbucks on Jackson, and I cannot tell you the number of people who would just leave their shit in the parking lot. And I will tell you, the number of people who would just leave their shit in the parking lot are the people who were also just horrible people right to your face. So these garbage people who are leaving their trash everywhere for somebody else to pick up are also the people who don't care about actual people behind any of this. So don't be a garbage human. Like, it really is not hard. It really is not hard. All right, Homo sapiens have a disproportionate effect on the natural world. We demand space and resources and destroy habitat on which other life depends. It's pretty bleak, guys. It is pretty bleak. Speaking of pretty bleak, chapter 20 is pretty bleak. So sorry that I just went on that tirade monologue, but it's really important. Like, if you don't care, this is the thing. Okay, and I'm going to be done with it in a second. If you don't care about the community you live in, the health, the beauty of the community you live in, the pollution in the community that you live in, what do you care about? Yourself? What? Like, what do you actually care about? So, like, this is the world that we're leaving to our children. And I know I'm like that crazy pregnant woman now. It's like the world we're leaving to our children. But it is real ass, okay? It's real ass true. And like, we just have to start thinking about that. So anyway, I'm gonna throw up because I got myself all worked up. Morning sickness is not just the morning. And guys, please go watch chapter 20. I'm gonna go ahead and upload this. Again, sorry for my tirade. Love y'all. And you did so awesome this semester. You did so awesome. It's crazy. Keep killing it. When you're back at your parties post-COVID, your fraternity, sorority parties, when you're back in your life after this, just like stand up for yourself, for the community that you live in, and tell your friends not to be disgusting stewards of the world. That's on you too. It's on you. I mean, we can just say it. It's easy. Okay, maybe I'm just a mean old lady now. I don't know. Bye.